I think that's all. Oleg or Jonas, do you want to say something?
No, not really.
No. So,
Just straight away.
all right.
Oh, I know why you're chasing all the headlights. Oh, 'cause you're always trying to get ahead of.
All right. Hello, everybody. Hello. Nice. I just came from Turku. Like, really nice to come here to talk in Helsinki. Also, I see that the community here is a lot bigger than we have in Turku. So really, really nice. And thank you, everybody, for coming to check this out today. And I was really pleased to come and join you to talk about web components. Anybody here know what web components are? All right, so about 50%. That's awesome. Anyway, my full name is Sami Suo-Heikki. You can find me on Twitter, GitHub. I have nice track record in GitHub going on at the moment, so please check it out. I actually just a few weeks ago joined Reactor as they opened their offices in Turku. And also a small entrepreneur. I have Identio as my startup thing. But anyway, I'm today here talking about web components. And before Reactor, I was in a company called Vaadin in Turku. And their whole new business is to create web components for business applications. So pretty much my last couple of years have been going on with web components, and really pleased to talk to you about them today. So I have one simple example what web components look like and how we can use them. So I've created this cool element which was also presented by some Google engineers in their own Polymer Summit, which was really cool. But I've created this Pokemon selector, and it is a web component. And how today we can use web components is to use this new standard with HTML imports. So HTML imports, they work pretty much the same way as importing some CSS files in your application. But instead of importing CSS, you're importing entire HTML files. And if you want to use this Pokemon selector, the only thing that we need to do after the import is to actually set up the Pokemon selector tag in our application, and the output should be something like this. So you can type, you can scroll to the drop down and select your favorite Pokemon from there. Really cool element. But of course, who wants to create an entire application by just using one element? Thankfully for this purpose, there's this really cool site called the webcomponents.org. And the webcomponents.org is kind of like an online catalog for all of the web components built by companies or by just single developers. And the site currently has like over 1,200 building blocks for your application. And cool thing about them is that they all work pretty much the same way. So you simply just import them, or install, import, and then use them. Usually when I talk about web components, I like to compare web components to Legos. I put this t-shirt today morning, actually entirely on purpose, because if you're, for example, building with Legos, you have these simple blocks, but you can't really do any cool stuff with just one block. But when you have like 100 or 1,000 blocks, then you can start building some really cool shit like spaceships or like medieval castles. And that is really like the same promise that web components promises. So you have these single elements, for example, Pokemon selectors and routing and buttons and stuff like that, and them itself doesn't do much. But when you combine them, use all of them, then you have really cool application with little few coding. Next up, I can present a bit about the history of web components. So web components were first presented or talked about about 6 years ago by Google engineer called Alex Russell. So they were in this meetup called Frontiers in California, and his speak was about web components and model-driven views. So that is really what sparked up the web component and got things rolling out. And then a couple of years after that, Google, with Alex Russell of course, released the 0.1 version of this Polymer library. And Polymer, it is a web component library built by Google, and its just single purpose is to help developers to create custom elements more easily. So they have some boilerplate code in there, and also some easier APIs and cool features like data binding. So when 0.1 was released, there was huge spike in interest about web components, but pretty much the next thing that people notice is that these web components are not that well supported in browsers. So that put the interest a bit down, and then when you didn't have any browser support, what you should do? Well, maybe take some alternatives, for example, React. And that was pretty much the end of web components as we know it. Of course not. A couple of years ago, there was some more involvement by the community around web components. Xtag, which is another library that is built by Microsoft, their 1.0 release was done in early 2015, so about 2 years ago. And after that, the interest towards web components started to a bit spike up again. And not too late from that, also Polymer 1.0 major release was released. So few years after the 0.1 was released. And as the people in Google, they used to say that the 0.1 version was just to find out what or how should we build applications and elements in the future, and then start building tools how we can do it today. So the 0.1 was pretty much like an experiment how we can do this, and then the 1.0 was already production ready stuff that we can actually use in our business or any free time applications. After that, also one of my favorites called the Skate.js. Skate.js is a library built by Trey Shergart, who is a developer at Atlassian, but on his free time he has built this really cool and high-level library for building web components called Skate.js. Definitely worth looking at. And not too late after that, there were some major changes towards web components. So the whole specifications, what web components meant and so on, got their 1.0 version. So now we had some really cool info on how web component should actually work. And at the same time, when the new specifications and polyfills for them were released, the Polymer 2.0 version was released also. So a bit on the May 2017, so this year. And if you're wondering what the polyfills mean, polyfills is actually just a simple JavaScript file that you can use in your application, and that will actually polyfill all the missing features that the browsers don't have and add them. But of course, the minus part about polyfills is that you have to download some extra KPIs in your application, and of course they're a bit slower than the native versions. And where are we today and where are we going? Right now there's been really active development around web components. So for example, the Ionic team, they released the stencil tool a month ago or something like that. And actually the whole Ionic platform will start using web components in the future. At the same time, Polymer 3.0 preview was released, so some cool new stuff for the Polymer library. And then some other JavaScript frameworks have already been starting to adopt web components also, for example, Svelte. So that was kind of like the brief introduction on the history of web components. Next up, I will talk a bit about the whole technical aspect on web components, of what web components are and what are the forces behind it. So the web component standards, they include four different specifications. And the first specification is custom elements. And custom elements is a really simple thing. It just means that browsers should be able to render these our own custom made elements, and they should work exactly the same as native HTML elements. So that is the spec number one. Spec number two was something that we already saw. It was called the HTML imports, meaning that we can actually import whole HTML files in our apps. And the third part was something that we not discussed yet. It's called templates. And template is this kind of like simple tool that you can wrap some parts of your application inside a template. And when you load your application, the content of that template won't actually be loaded and the resources won't be fetched. So that means that you can actually write some of your HTML in forward and then use it only at the moment that we actually need it. And then the last specification is called Shadow DOM. And Shadow DOM is like really, it's kind of like complex for the browsers to implement. But what it really means is that we can actually scope our custom elements to be totally separated from our application's DOM. Meaning that if we put some CSS rules or some for example CSS rules, those CSS rules should not affect anything that is inside the Shadow DOM. Meaning that if we create these reusable custom elements, we know that they work exactly the same way. Doesn't matter what the application is or what framework it is using. And that is really like, I think that is the biggest promise that web components bring, is that you can build your elements just once and then reuse them in all of your application. Doesn't matter what the stack is. I already mentioned about the browser support, and we can check it out how the browser support for web components is looking right now. So templates, which was like a really simple thing for the browser vendors to implement, is already shipped across all the major evergreen browsers. Even Edge supports it. The next up was the custom elements. And custom element is currently natively supported in Chrome and Safari. But at the moment, Firefox is already developing their support for custom elements. And about Edge, well, somebody has to call Microsoft to do some work. Yeah, pretty much the same thing about Shadow DOM. So it's supported in Chrome, supported in Safari. Firefox is developing it. Actually, I just heard like 30 minutes ago is that Firefox will deploy their stable release of Shadow DOM at the end of this year, which is really cool stuff. But then there's another part that we didn't actually discuss yet, and which is actually not part of the HTML specs. But there's one line with ES6 modules. Anybody here used ES6 modules? Okay, about 30%. Those are really awesome. And the same part, or at the same time, also like engineers at Google who are building Polymer and so on, have discovered that this HTML import style doesn't really work with other JavaScript frameworks or doesn't really solve any new problems. So instead of using HTML imports, I think the web components are moving a bit more towards using ES6 modules. So for example, I was talking about the Polymer library, Polymer 2.0 will actually, it uses the HTML imports, but the 3.0 will actually totally discard the HTML imports and start using ES6 modules. So things are going in a right direction. Anybody know what this bird is? Yeah, what is it? Yes, Bower. Who here likes Bower? Yeah, that's the thing that I knew. So nobody raised their hands. Nobody likes Bower. Few months ago, I think when I did Bower install with some of the Polymer elements, I already noticed that Bower is actually like not supported anymore. Please don't use it. And I was like, what? Okay, well, it still works at least. But yeah, previously, for example, the Polymer library has heavily depended on using Bower. And Bower has some like cool features, for example, allowing elements or allowing modules to have like flat dependencies, meaning that once we are installing, for example, Pokemon Selector, we know that in our directory we have only one version of Pokemon Selector. It doesn't make sense that we would have multiple of them. But this was a really cool animation. Yeah. This is where we're going in the future. So for example, the Polymer 3.0, they have already ditched Bower, which is, I think, is a really cool thing. But it's not really sure that will they support NPM by default, or will they require the use of Yarn? Because, for example, at the moment, only Yarn supports flat dependencies when installing them. So at least the Polymer 3.0 still requires to use Yarn. But I would really much like that we can ditch Yarn too and just use NPM 5.
Why?
Why about NPM 5 or about Yarn?
About Yarn?
Yeah, I think if you look, I can go to the previous slide. If you look at Yarn versus NPM 5, I think Yarn was published like few months before NPM 5, and right now the NPM 5, I think that solves pretty much the same problems and has the same kind of features.
I don't think it has the log file though.
Yeah, the NPM 5 has log file also too. Yeah.
Yarn did recently come out with version 1.0, which has some new features,
Yeah.
workspace, which is like NPM more flexible, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're both evolving still, for sure.
And
Yeah.
they broke the publish command. The Yarn publish is broken.
Well, I'm surprised.
Yeah, so one more reason to use NPM then. Yeah, just kidding, just kidding.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, earlier in my presentation I was talking about that once you build your elements, you can use them in any stack. And that is, of course, the ideal world. But of course, in reality, things are not that simple. There's this really cool site called customelementseverywhere.com, which is built by one of the Chrome engineers, Rob Dunson. And he has just listed like pretty much the most popular JavaScript frameworks and how web components work in them. For example, they work perfectly on Vue, perfectly on Angular, but not so great, for example, with React at the moment. But I'm really hoping that in the future, for example, during this year, all of these frameworks in here would reach the 30 out of 30 score. So, but at least we are moving all the time towards being more supported in all of the frameworks too. Yeah, here's just some logos that I added about the current frameworks out there. I think the biggest one still is Polymer, but for example, SkateJS, Stencil are already catching up. And also, if you want some cool elements for your business apps, I recommend the Vaadin elements that I built for 2 years. Really great. But also there are some smaller players still in town, for example, Slim.js. But it's really nice to see that there's more involvement all the time. Then, this was something that I was dreading about. doing a live demo. Anybody have done live coding in front of audience? Only a couple. Hopefully good memories out of that. But anyway, I was just thinking that I would create a simple Hello World application, or Hello World element, I mean. So I have here my index.html file that has one script that loads the Hello World JS file, and then in the body I have just the Hello World tags, and I can maybe zoom this a bit. And if everybody can see it, right? Yeah. All right, cool. So yeah, what I want to do is that this Hello World tag would output, of course, Hello World in it. Currently, my Hello World JS is totally empty, and if we look at our site, its 2 is still totally empty. The browser still sees that, hey, there's some Hello World tag in here, but of course we haven't registered that as a custom element, so meaning it won't be showing anything. But let's get our hands dirty then. Let's check out what it looks like. So I was talking about templates, and with templates we can actually create these, well, reusable templates that we can use in our application, or I mean in our elements. And cool part about these templates is that once I put document.not_template.create_element template. Yeah, cool thing about this is that once I create the inner HTML of my template, the whole content will actually be totally separated from the rest of my application's DOM. Meaning that I can, for example, create style tags here. Style. And then use this cool feature called the host selector. And if I use host selector inside Shadow DOM, the host selector will actually mean the current element that I'm using. And a really cool, or like a common way of creating your elements is to add display block for the element. So they will work pretty much the same way as normal divs. And as I was saying, I would want to create a Hello World example in here. So let's say Hello World. All right, cool. Does it work? No, of course, I'm still missing some parts. We only have template in here and we are not using it anywhere. So next up, we will actually create a new, let's say, Hello World class. And as we want to create a custom element, we can extend the native HTML element class. So that means that the Hello World will actually inherit all the same features that normal HTML elements have. And then the last part here is to use window.customelements, and there is a define function. And with the define function, it requires 2 parameters, the name of the custom element and also the constructor. So the name we want to specify as hello-world, and then the constructor with the hello world. Let's see how it looks. Still nothing. But actually, we have already now defined hello world tag in here. So this is right now like a valid HTML element already. But of course, the template lies here totally unused. We want to use that next. So let's create constructor. Super. All right, cool. And then we want to actually create a shadow DOM for our element. So we can use this dot attach shadow method. And let's give it one parameter here called mode is open. And what mode is open means is that we can actually interface with the insides of our shadow DOM from outside of the element. So I can actually show what it looks like. And then starting to use the actual template. So we use this dot shadow root and append one child in there, and then we will use the template tag. Template.content, it also every time has a content property that we can use, and then just clone that content and put it deep through. All right, what do you think? Should this work? Yes. All right, I'm as confident as you are. Yeah, cool, it works. So we did 20 lines of code and we already now have a reusable element. And if I open up the developer tools, I can actually see that Hello World has a shadow DOM inside it. I can open it, and in here I can see that the styles and the actual HTML are encapsulated in their own shadow DOM. I can, for example, show an example. If I add some styles here, so H1 should have color red, and then I would add another H1 in the index.html, hello from index. It works just as expected. So all of these CSS rules that we are specifying in here are only working for the elements that we are using in the same shadow DOM. So we can see that there's a color red in here. We can click the style, it puts out here, but then this does not have the color red inside it. Really cool feature. Then I will show one more thing, like working with attributes and properties, and if we want to create, for example, like a data binding system for our element. Let's say I want to specify the text that my Hello World element has. So I'm setting up text Hello Helsinki. Nice to be here. And wink face or smiley face actually. Of course, it's not yet showing, but we can see in the developer tools that the actual attribute has been specified. But some of the things that we want to create here, for example, if we want to allow the same kind of interface by using JavaScript, so we can access the same things using properties, we can put setters and getters for that text attribute, not text content, get text, and this should return the text attribute. So this get attribute and text. And then same kind of setter, set text, and that takes one parameter, let's call it value, and it will just set the attribute text to have the value inside it. All right, cool. So now we can interface with our element both from HTML and from JavaScript side. All right, but right now our element or our attribute is not used anywhere. One thing that we can, for example, create here is to create one static getter for the observed attributes. So observed attributes. All right, and we need to return a new array. And inside this array, we just specify all the attribute names that we want to observe. So every time text value changes, it will call attribute changed callback. So attribute changed callback. Let's specify the do a console log here. Let's just check it out that does it work. All right, and looks like it is doing some console log in there. So this attribute change callback, it will get 3 parameters. It will get the attribute's name and then the previous value of what the attribute's value was and then the new value. So now we can do, for example, that if attribute is text, then we can, for example, set this dot shadow root, and now we are using the shadow root. Now we can use just like some normal query selector in here. So for example, h1 inner text equals new value. All right, and I think that is it. 38 lines, and let's see what we have made in here. So hello Helsinki, nice to be here. Cool, it's showing. Let's check out that does it really see the attribute changes. So hello from Turku. Yeah, it's immediately updated in the view also. As you can see, it's in the text and it's also in the headings 1. Also the same thing with JavaScript. So I can first select the current element. This actually not that I want to specify this hello world element. All right, hello world element. And as we created the getters and setters, this should have a text getter in here. So yes, text property currently equals hello from Turku. So now we can also create a new value from it, hello from my console. Yes, and it works exactly the same way. So this is pretty much a very simple way of creating your reusable elements in only 38 lines. And what is really cool about here is that I'm using only the web platform. So I'm not importing any external libraries, any extra frameworks. This is just simple JavaScript that we can use in the browsers today. Of course, not in all the browsers, but hopefully during this year we will have them everywhere. So that was everything that I had. I really appreciate your questions and thank you. Do we have questions? Oh, take this. Nice throw.
Sweet. All right. Do you see being able to iterate over these tags and replace something like handlebars?
Yeah, that is one way. For example, the Polymer library that I've used a lot, they use like square brackets and curly brackets in creating like data binding in there. So that is, I would recommend to use like already made library for using that. Yeah, but that's really cool. Any other questions?
Thank you. So I liked your reference to Legos, but my question is, will web components hurt me the same way as Legos do when I step on them?
We need to find out. Yeah, I don't know. Like, of course, if you saw my graph like going up and down with web components. Of course, web components have hurt me sometimes when I'm like with IE11. I'm like, why is this not working? Oh yeah, I don't have the polyfills. But hopefully in the future they will get a lot softer and they won't hurt any of us. Yeah, there's more questions.
All right, thanks. My question is about React. How has the React team like reacted to the whole web components phenomena, or how you want to say it?
Yeah. So
do you know like more about it? You seem to be very on top of things with this.
yeah, I know at least something, not much about, of course, React in this case. But if you look at React documentation, they have like in there like how to use web components in React. But still, like when you start using actually them in React, they are working or they are not working. It requires sometimes some bit more hacking towards that. But I think the worst part is that in normal like React components, if you do, for example, inline styling, you don't really need like Shadow DOM anymore. You have already all the styles encapsulated. You have the elements encapsulated already. So for example, in the case of React, I see that they are like two different ways of tackling the same problem. And at the moment, it doesn't like look like it that if you just want to create custom elements and only use them in React, that it would like solve any problems in there. But of course, if you want to create elements and use them in a lot of different frameworks, then I would recommend it. But if only React, then maybe no.
All right, so like a quick follow-up questions about the performance of web components in browsers today.
Yeah.
How do they perform like compared to like Vue or React Fiber or?
Yeah, like if you do web components correctly, then they are like kind of like performing also. But of course, if you take, for example, Polymer library, and you take some elements built by the Polymer library, and also those elements will include more elements inside them and more elements inside them. So I did a test with some like dialog element by the Polymer team, and it already has like some 100 kilobytes of data downloaded already and only has a dialog. So, well, yeah, on my experience, like with performance, React has been on top of it, and also Vue.
Yeah, there's been like on a project that I'm working currently, we have the problem with the JavaScript bundle being too large, or it's not too large, but Lighthouse thinks that it's too large.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't remember how much, but under a megabyte anyway, and zipped even less, but there's still like a problem, and it's very hard to make it smaller. So if the bundle will be larger with web components, that's kind of a problem.
Yes.
In some cases.
Yeah, but like, well, of course I can't answer that problem actually, because the web components today have been using, for example, Bower, and using Bower and Webpack doesn't really like go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's true.
So of course, if you would use web components, then they would be imported like lazily after the bundle itself. So yeah, might make sense at some points, but I recommend to test out before production.
Yeah, I'll have to do some testing. Anyone else?
So then, how do you do dependency injection then? Can you share dependencies somehow between the components, or like what one component will load Angular, the other will load another Angular, or how does that work?
Yeah. So the cool part I forgot to mention with the HTML imports is that if you have already imported like some path already, and then you use it again in some other element, it won't actually load it again. So it will use immediately what it has already. So if we have two same files being used, it will only load it once.
Fair enough. But then, like, if you bundle it into your component, then that's a problem, obviously.
If you bundle it, you should only have one version of that element. So, for example, the Polymer team has this tool called Vulcanizer, which like bundles web components in a nice way that they will have only one version of one element per time.
Oh, all right, makes sense.
There's one question behind.
If you can flatten dependencies, how are they versioned? Do they follow Semver or some other scheme?
And then you, of course, it will first check out from, for example, in the Bower JSON or Yarn log files, like what are the dependencies set. But then if there are conflicts, then you just have to resolve them manually that, okay, I will select this dependency from this.
Okay, so it doesn't do versioning, you have to resolve them. Yeah, okay.
All right, I guess that was everything.
Thanks.
Who's next? Yes, kiitos.
You know I'll be waiting on the other side. And I know it's cold, but if you stay then I could keep you warm at night. Don't be a fool.
Sorry, the music stopped since your Google Play Music account is being used on another device.
Okay.
All right, Daniel, I think you're free to go whenever you're ready.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name's Dan Yuschick. This is my first time speaking in Helsinki. I actually just moved here from the States just 3 months ago. So pretty brand new, so thank you very much for having me. While this is still JavaScript related, it is a lot lighter than getting into web components and everything. I got into web development by way of web design and graphic design. So a lot of my own personal projects still relate heavily on design and animation. I definitely got onto the SVG train, and I like doing a lot of animation with that because it's a good way to combine my interest in design as well as my interest in actually bringing it all to life. So a lot of my personal projects end up revolving around recreating watches that I find inspiring. How many people wear the Apple Watch? Okay, not as many as I was expecting. All right, so I'm a big fan of mechanical watchmaking. So I follow a lot of my favorite watchmakers, and when they create a new piece that I really enjoy, I like to try and recreate that by using SVG and JavaScript. So one of the first pieces that I had done with that was actually a watchmaker from Helsinki here, Stepan Sarpaneva. And this was one of my first pieces, and it allows all the SVG funness of just changing classes and transitioning styles, so you could recreate all the different versions of that one watch. So built that, and then went into creating more pieces that have similar functionality but are just laid out a little bit differently. And then even went into a really obscure one from Resonance, where it uses all kinds of weirdness to tell the time. Even though these are 3 watches that are very drastically different, they were all fundamentally using the same logic of just taking the current time and rotating values based on that. So I started getting the idea of putting all this logic together so I can easily reuse it across projects. And the watch, my latest recreation that really drove this home is also from another Finnish watchmaker. Let's see. Is that going to refresh? No. Okay. Another watchmaker here, and what about this design made me start thinking in terms of classes and components was the fact that this is a dual time watch, where you have the primary dial that has the current local time, and then you have a secondary dial which functions independently but shows a second time zone. So again, this got me thinking about these are 2 dials that are using the exact same functionality but run completely independent of each other. So you can set the time and then set the time of the secondary dial as well. So these are 2 different things, but they're working off the same logic. So that got me thinking into, why don't I just create, say, a dial class and just instantiate it multiple times in the same design? And it is with that general concept that I began building out the library TickTock. Extremely niche library. I think it has like 7 stars on GitHub. This is the most fun thing I've ever built in my life. And that's why you get into development. It's fun. So as you see here, I have a bunch of different components that you can use. So we have calendar components, which you can use to display what's called a perpetual calendar. So you can show the day, the date, the month, or even the year in its relationship to whether it's a leap year or not. You have chronographs where you can actually time events down to 1/10 of a second, and everything will keep track here with various functionality of resets and flybacks, a whole bunch of stuff. Here you have the dials again that show 2 different time zones, day-night indicator. Probably my personal favorite is the minute repeater. And I don't think I can get sound to play on my laptop while I'm plugged in. Oh, yes I can. So you can actually, minute repeaters will actually audibly dictate the time to you, where it has one chime for the hours, a second chime for the minutes. Fun fact, in the movie theaters now, everyone has to turn off their phone. Back in the day, when minute repeaters were a big thing, people would go to the opera and they would have to tell people, do not check your watch while the opera's going on. We have advanced quite a bit. Yeah, and then moon phase, which I found a nice library online I was able to leverage, which will take the current position of the moon, translate that into a number, and then I rotate a disk X amount of degrees based on that number. And then ultimately the power reserve, which this one has run empty already. So once the power reserve runs empty, this watch stops working. So yeah, so that was a quick overview of TickTock. And again, I had fun building this site and putting through all the documentation and everything. So there's a lot of functionality here, a lot of options, a lot of things that you can cover, but I figured we could actually go through and keep with the theme of live coding and go through a quick little demo where we can build the first guide watch that we have here. So the first watch that I can show us building is a simple GMT watch. So it has 2 time zones, again, the local one and foreign time, and then we're going to have a power reserve as well. So while the kind of the API of TickTock is very simple, a lot of it is design driven, where it's very particular with how you lay out the watch initially. So I'm going to grab this SVG code that I already have optimized for this demo, and we're going to take a look at seeing how the SVG should look in its initial state. So don't need that twice, but we can save this. All right. Yep. All right. So how can we actually use TickTock? So let's bring over this. And then we're going to bring over our console, and I will zoom in on everything here. So first thing we want to do is we're going to add TickTock into our project. So we can just install this via Yarn. Very quick install there. And if we take a look at the package file, let me zoom in. Is that good? Yeah. Cool. All right, so this is just a real quick package file I threw together so we can get some live reloading and everything going on and bundling. But yeah, just bringing in the TickTock library. So once we have that brought in, we can close this. And I'm going to cheat. I always have a reference open. So, all right. So we downloaded our optimized SVG. So we can just grab that, and this has all the styles and everything in line just to keep it very simple. And with that, we can just grab that SVG and drop it into a container here that I just have centering everything. So we save this. I'm just going to spin up a quick server here through Atom. Okay. So this gives us our initial state of the watch. So TickTock expects the hands and pretty much every element to be starting in their 0th position. So whether it's the minute hand, hour hand, second hand, everything is going to be set in its base, like 0 position. So whether it's like the moon phase dial, or the date disk would start on 1 and the month would start on January. So a lot of that design stuff is implied through the library. Sometimes if you do it in reverse, I do have invert functionality in there. So if you want, say, the moon phase to spin the other direction, you can do that. But it is very centered on how you do the initial design. A lot of it is very dependent upon that. So we see here that we have all the hands starting, and even on the second dial, sticking straight up to the 12 o'clock. So now that we have our SVG here, switch back over, and let's close this for now. And let's actually bring TickTock into our project here. So, fun fact, I'm also a horrible typer, so I don't know why I still choose to do live coding, but just kind of bear with it here. And then we can just do logout watch. So currently we'll get an error about require not being defined. So I'm just going to run my watchify, so that now when we save this and we switch back over, we see now that we're at least getting some response back from the watch class. Because that's how the whole library works, is you instantiate just the initial watch class, and based on the settings that you pass in, it pulls in the additional classes. So the dial is its own class, and it just instantiates a new instance of it. A moon phase is its own class, and it just instantiates a new instance of that as well. So everything about this is just class-based and is based entirely on the settings that you pass in. So we're going to create our first settings, and we're just going to create an object, and we can reference the docs and see that, hey, we want to create some dials. So we can come to the dials and get an overview on stuff, and get a good introduction on what you can do and what to expect, what's required. So we want to define a dial. And we can do that by using the dials key, which is going to be an array, not an object just yet. And because we can, in this case, we're going to have multiple dials, we want to be able to pass in multiple objects of information. So we're going to name everything. And then this gets into the core of it. We're going to pass in the actual hand elements. So TickTock needs to know what elements it's going to animate. So if we look over in the SVG, we see here that, here we go. Here we have these elements with our ID tags. So all these IDs were created in Illustrator, and when they're exported out, just remain there. So we want to be able to animate the primary hands to tell the time currently here, and then we want to animate the secondary hands to tell the time probably in New York. So what we would do for this is we just pass in that ID as a string. So we have our primary second hand. And then we do the same for minute and hour. Okay. So this at least gets us started with creating our settings. But then we just need to create the new instance of our watch. So we can just say new watch and just pass in our settings object. So as we do this, we'll hopefully see some madness going on. Yes, we do. See the second hand kind of just like out of the way now. This is some fun transform origin stuff in CSS. So I'm actually just going to grab this from from the guide, so I don't have to type all of it out. But if you go to the guides, I explain what's happening here, that SVG will rotate generally from the top left corner as its transform origin point. So we just want to update that to point at the center point of the dials. So don't judge me harshly for tossing this all inline in the file. I think you can all understand it's just a demo. So with that, this should refresh. And now we see here that the hands are rotating from the center point of the full dial. And just by passing in that small object, now we have these 3 elements telling the current time, right? So then we have other options that we can play with, where in that case the second hand was ticking. I'd prefer to sweep, so it's more of a cleaner animation. So to do that now, we see that the second hand will just cleanly animate and sweep across the dial. So then we can do the same thing for our second dial. And we're just going to change all this up to be secondary. And let's remove the sweep. So now we see here that our second dial is telling the time just like the first dial, but with the different functionality of the second hand. So one of the challenges with this was being able to easily create the new instances of a dial, but give it a different time zone to work with. Ultimately, I settled on including moment time zone to deal with this. So if we wanted to adjust our secondary dial to support a different time zone, we just pass that in, and then this is just pulling in the options from moment time zone. So we're just going to pull in New York, which should just be 7 hours behind us. So now if we refresh, it is, let's see, 7:30, yep, and it's just about 12:30 now in New York. So by including in moment with the library, it's very easy to just start jumping around between time zones. And what's great too is moment already took account of like, daylight savings and stuff like that, which I wasn't trying to write all of that code myself. If it's already done, don't reinvent the wheel. So with that, we have both dials working and telling the time in 2 different zones. So this brings us to our power reserve, and this is just an indicator that is exactly what it sounds like. As long as there's a reserve of power, the watch will run. If not, the watch will stop. So how we want to do that is to actually just pass in then our reserve property. And this will take 2 values. Again, it will take an ID. Power reserve hand. Because if we look through here, we should see, there we go. So here we have power reserve hand. And actually, I'll show the next property next. Then we're going to define what's called a range. And I'll get into explaining this. So the range determines how far the hand will move before it has reached its full power and before it has reached empty power. So originally, I explained that everything should be designed like sticking straight. Everything should just go straight up. So in this case, we're going to pass in a value of -90 as its empty point. So if we rotate the power reserve hand 90 degrees counterclockwise, that means it's reached its empty point. So it can't go any further. At that point, the clock stops. And then we also pass in a +90. So if we rotate it 90 degrees to the right, it will be full, and that is having full power then. So we define the range of motion. We say this is its ending point, this is its max point. So you could do this. You could design the hand at the empty spot and do 0 and 180. You could do that as well. I've just gotten in the habit of designing it right through the middle of the power reserve. So if we save that, we see here that the power reserve defaults to full power, right? Other watches I built, you can actually just wind the watch so it does actually increase the power reserve. And if we wanted to sit here all night, we could actually watch it slowly empty until the watch stops. But we can kind of speed that up, so we can say 89. So this will say at 90 degrees it's full, but at 89 degrees it's going to shut off. So it should only take like a couple seconds. There we go. The power reserve is now empty, and everything on the watch will stop. So the timeout that's running in the background there that keeps checking sees that the power reserve is empty, so it clears the timeout until it's wound again. And then once it's wound again, then it will start running from this current point. So that's the quick demo of TickTock. Like I said, I know it wasn't like super code heavy or anything, but it's something I just have fun doing. So very niche. If anyone wants to play with it, that's awesome. There are a few goals I have going forward with this. If we check out GitHub here, I keep an ongoing list of tasks that I'm hoping to achieve in the near future. So there's another type of chronograph functionality I'd like to include, retrograde hours and minutes, and a few things like this, updating the minute repeater, a whole bunch of things like that. This is the pure definition of a passion project. I just enjoy the art of watchmaking. I can't actually make a watch. This is as close as I can get. But it's actually led me to meeting a handful of the watchmakers that I've recreated here, because I'll send them the links and they'll really enjoy it. So it's been a lot of fun to do. So with that, I want to open up if anyone has any questions. I don't feel like throwing this too far.
Okay, so I got two questions. First, can you tell March time?
March time? I don't believe so, no.
Okay, I'm waiting for that. I'll open an issue, okay?
There you go, open the issue, yep.
And second, will you have some sort of pro subscription service to ensure your watches doesn't run out of power,
That's in the works. Just do another issue. We'll figure that one out.
Thanks.
Yeah. Got one back here.
Or if I might
Yeah,
here.
go for it.
First things first, did you update iTerm?
Probably not, no.
You should do it. It's leaking stuff to do DNS checks with your passwords and stuff, or anything it thinks is a link. So
good to know.
Or it should up in the feature. Second is browser support.
So everything right now, it's being run through Babel down to ES5. So just including it into the project like that, you're gonna be fine. Yeah, it's just like any other library that you'd bring in like that.
All right, and I don't know if you probably said, but I missed it. But the power drainage, like how quickly it goes, is that?
I actually forget exactly.
Was it seconds, or what was it based on? So.
I want to say it empties maybe like a quarter of a degree every second. So if you actually do a full 180 degrees, you have quite a few minutes.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So, whoa.
Calm down.
Yeah. How old were you when you realized your love to watches?
It was actually only about like 8 or 9 years ago. I saw the first piece to me from Stepan Sarpaneva from here, and there was something about his design and aesthetics that really appealed to me, and I really got interested from there.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Awesome work with the library.
Thank you.
What kind of use cases do you see, maybe outside of this really small group of people that really into watches?
Honestly, I don't know. If someone wants to like recreate like a Wall Street type of like stock exchange where it has like all the clocks on it or something like that, like I said, it's very niche. It's built specifically to recreate watches. It could be, for clocks, grandfather clocks and stuff like that as well. Given that it's just at the core, it's just taking time and then converting it into angles. I don't know how many other use cases there are for it, but that wasn't my big concern when starting this. It was just I keep writing the same functionality over and over again. I should just write something that make it easier for me.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, welcome to Finland, by the way.
Thank you.
First of all, you mentioned Illustrator. Is that your tool of choice for SVGs, or do you have anything else to recommend?
For now, I use Illustrator. I haven't really dabbled much in Sketch yet, but I feel like that is probably going to be a good option as well. But like Illustrator, well, like any kind of WYSIWYG editor, Illustrator is going to export out SVG code that's pretty bloated. So there's some really good SVG optimizers as well. So anything I edit in Illustrator, I take that code and just take it through an SVG optimizer as well, and then that's the product that I use.
Okay. Another question, since we're talking about a JavaScript library, how is the performance? Like if I want to have 1,000 watches on my web page, how does it perform?
I haven't actually done like any very like load heavy tests. I haven't really noticed any issues with running like 4 dials at one time, but obviously 4 is significantly less than 100, 200, and so I haven't really looked at like the key frame or like the frames per second, but I haven't really noticed much issue just doing one at a time. So. Yeah. Hey, I'm fine. I'm fine with the open issues.
Anyone else with a question?
Back here.
I'm seeing you used a fixed pixel width and height for the clock. Is it, say, responsive or some sort, because you have to manually edit it every time you change the size? Right?
Yeah, so for this demo, I just have arbitrary values in there, but you could, the whole point of SVG is to be responsive, so this can scale responsively. Yeah, so as long as your actual like the CSS units, you're using explicit values instead of like center or top or something like that, because I know Firefox has issues with transform origin points in that regard. But even this watch, I think it was designed natively at 500 by 500. I have it scaled down to a different size, 300 or so. Still, as long as the CSS values for your transform origin are at the center point of what the watch natively is, those points will scale as well with the full SVG.
Okay. Another question: Do you have intention to implement different modes or different appearances of the watch, like the fancy watches you have in the code pens, for example? So instead of downloading the separate SVG files, you can just load the JS file and then it's included inside. So it makes it more convenient, I guess.
So just kind of like package everything together.
Yeah.
That's definitely possible. So like on the demo site itself, that's pretty much how the base complications here are working on the main page. Is I just pass in whether I'm doing a dial or a chronograph or something like that, and then it just returns that block of SVG code, that block of settings, and it just instantiates a new watch with those settings. So, you can definitely package everything together so you can just download and run.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that you document your niche passion project better than I document most production code. So kudos.
Thank you. Thank you. Cool. We got one more.
Please show the watches you showed at the start again, because they were really cool, and I want to take a picture.
Yes. Yeah, so this is the Sarpaneva Northern Lights. So this one has a moon phase dial, which you can actually just click to speed up to see how the whole galaxy goes, whatever. But the big thing about this is, yeah, it has the different variations of green and purple, and then it has a luminescence feature. So that one was a lot of fun to play with. This one is a German manufacturer, Elonge & Son. And this one was fun because the hours and minutes are actually split into multiple disks. So there's a disk from 1 through 9, or 0 through 9, and a disk from 0 through 6 for the tenths minutes and the individual minutes as well. So this one also has the power reserve. And all these watches as well, you can manually wind and set the time as well. Let's see. Except the resonance, this one has a weird mechanism that you have to update by the form. But this tells the whole, this is the date, so we can see here based on this dot that it's the end of Thursday. This line's Friday, and then you got Saturday and Sunday highlighted. This is a crazy unique way to tell the time. So you have the minutes on the outer dial. So if we'd update this to say, in the 30s, that's the outer dial, and the whole dial rotates with it. So this one was crazy to build. This one was crazy to build.
How many hours did it take for the build that?
The resonance probably took me about 30 hours. A lot of the challenge comes with the actual design process. Especially this, it's hard to tell on the monitor, but this has a Gay-Lusche dial, so it has like a really intricate texture there as well. So that took a very, very long time. But then, yeah, this one, you can set the time and then focus on the secondary dial and set that as well.
Can you zoom in?
Yep. Should be able to. View, zoom in. I don't know why that's not actually working from the keyboard. But yeah, so on this watch, you're manually setting the time. TickTock will automatically bind those key events as well. And if you notice when you click on the crown, it pops out a little bit. It also automatically binds active classes as well, so you can actually create like little animation effects for feedback. So a lot of stuff comes out of the box. Anything else?
Yeah, I guess we need to move forward.
Yeah, I think we're good. Thank you very much.
We're going to continue straight away with Jani's homework.
Okay. Can you hear me? So since I guess I understood we're a bit tight on time, I think we'll get starting in just a few minutes. So hopefully we'll have some quiet. Thank you very much. So thanks to the first two speakers for their interesting talk. The next topic that I will be presenting will, at least compared to watchmaking, be maybe a bit more practical, useful, depending on obviously your kind of area. But if you're kind of into mainstream things, it might be more useful, but maybe kind of less interesting. So what we're going to talk about is easy decoupled site building with GraphQL and Next.js. As said, we're quite tight on time, so I will compress things quite fast, hopefully. I'll actually set the timer that I remember to finish in 15 minutes and then continue for a few minutes more. But in any case, so this will by default presume that you know a lot more about JavaScript than I do. That's the first thing that you need to remember, because I have done JavaScript for a long time, but I kind of understand it, but not really. So first, a few things about me. So I've been doing web development for over 20 years, for 17 years to get money, but even before for fun. So I'm interested in all kind of things related to technology. So not only web pages and so on, but pretty much everything. Currently, I mostly work with content things, mostly because I hate to do forms. And if I do application development, I have to create forms. And forms are horrible still. I do have a working knowledge of TypeScript and JavaScript, which is pretty much the same thing. And also mostly then also Symfony and PHP. So those are the languages that I do type somewhat fluently. My day job is at Easy Systems. It's a company who creates fantastic content management tools for companies such as the Financial Times, The Economist, Comcast, and Telefonica, for example. And as you can imagine, enterprise-grade content management can be quite boring, so I do other things as well during night times at a small business which pays the hosting for my hobbies. And what we talk about today, or what I will talk about, is what one of the things that I have experimented with, but I thought it would be useful to share because it might be useful for somebody else as well. But anyway, if you see this image is me. It's my personal branding. I created with GIMP. So it's great.
Where's the green bell peppers?
I don't know. Let's see. But in any case, that's enough about me because we need to move forward. So we will talk about a bit basics. So decoupled site building, what is it? Then a brief introduction to GraphQL and Next.js, what are they? Then we'll take a brief walkthrough of the actual Hello World application, which I have created with these two technologies. And then finally, hopefully I will take the time to actually get to my experiences kind of as a layman of these things, where I might have give some value on how they might actually work, in my opinion, or not. So first of all, decoupled site building. As discussed, websites have been around for a long time. You don't get rich by building a WordPress site unless you build a WordPress site in 5 minutes, then you can be rich. But in any case, so for decoupled site building, it's technically that you have some kind of API from a content management system that you get only the data, and in some way you create a website or even a mobile application, something like that then will be consumed. And traditionally it's REST-based or some kind of JavaScript kludge, so you just have, output some kind of JSON instead of that kind of tiresome academic REST where you have to get everything for everything and so on. We've all probably taken some shortcuts there. Good. But anyway, so in any case, there's been obviously for a number of years, there's been a buzz around, decoupled things, and you can build things with REST APIs and so on, which is nice. But so far, it's not the standard way of creating sites. Probably if you have 9 out of 10 websites in Finland probably are nowadays probably something like WordPress or Drupal, but very few are actually built in a decoupled way. And if it is, it's kind of a boutique thing that we've just decided to build our own website like this. And because this kind of basic content management stuff is very bulk stuff, you can't really like spend time on a customer site to make it very fancy, and then or you can, but then probably you won't make much money out of the project. So in this case, obviously, then you have specific groups where this can actually build you value, that you have an outstanding content-driven website. But for many cases, it's actually nobody cares how you built it. As long as you build it fast and cheap. But that said, so to the brief introduction to these two technologies, which I am an amateur, but I think that's also where I can give you value because I don't know these. So anyway, these are two separate technologies that I think work very well together, and both are very opinionated. They don't leave space for, let me just figure out how I would like to put these things together, because that kind of thing is then the time that takes time away from the things that you need to produce very quickly and efficiently. And in this case, the end result is just a website. It's a website, but the key thing here is that the first load is server-side rendered React in this case, and then subsequently, if you click around, then you jump into the API-driven thing. So only the first time you get all the boilerplate HTML and so on. And as said, specific cases, for example, the economist.com has been now for 6 months or so. It's been driven by similar approach. It actually uses GraphQL, but not Next.js. But in any way, so this is one case where if publishing is your thing, then this can be valuable. And since I don't want to ever tie myself too much into any technology, so there's a few different ways that you can obviously build similar things. At least if you're into Vue, you can use Next.js, and then something from I think it was Netflix to GraphQL. There's Falcor, which is a similar kind of a thing from them. And who knows what's coming outside, because you can render JavaScript both on the client side and the server side just as well nowadays. So GraphQL quickly. So I didn't type here, but probably most of you know about GraphQL, at least by name. So from Facebook released only 2 years ago. It seems like it's ages ago, but only 2 years ago. So it's an alternative to REST, and it's a query language for your API. It's not a GraphQL SQL, but actually it can be, because there's a GraphQL database that actually uses this syntax for its system. But as said, you can dive into these later if you want to get more information. As said, it's a REST alternative. The key thing here is it doesn't use verbs. Everything is a post. You post, you want to update, you post when you want to request. You don't have the verbs that you have in REST. And implementations already exist in realm of CMS for many CMS and content APIs. For this presentation or demo, I also tried at least CosmicJS as well as Graph CMS, both of which were Fisher Price toys to me. So I chose not to use them because I didn't feel comfortable with them. But anyway, one of the key things which you can get advantage as opposed to REST is that you can embed resources within a single request. So instead of sending, give me all the members, 50 members, and then for each of those you want the profile image, you would get a total of 51 HTTP requests. One of the key things here is obviously then that you can do that in one. You can see intro video, just references, and so on. As said, we'll move fast. If you get lost, don't worry. I'm also lost. So for Next.js, first release was in 2016. It's not even a year old. It's moved forward very fast, but it is a JavaScript framework. It's not a library, it's a framework that is universal. It handles rendering and routing both on the client and the server side. It happens to use React.js currently for the view layer. You can use Preact.js if you don't like patents or whatever that is. But in any case, so you can probably use a lot of other things as well. But the key thing here is that a framework has already made a lot of decisions for me, and that's what I like. I don't want to invest too much thinking what is the best routing way, because somebody decided, well, this is how you route, well, this is how you route, and so on. It is very simple to get started with, but it is also very customizable, so you can use different node frameworks. You can use Express or Koa to do your backend stuff and so on. And enough about that. Again, you can find more information. One note is it is actually from a company called Zeit, and there's some Finnish guys also working on this product. So I'm not sure if they're here, but anyway, I think it's a really, really nice product from my experience. Then we'll go into the kind of demo. So because I like to do hello worlds, because that's all my attention span is enough for, is for this session I created something which you also have the source code so you can see how it's built. But it's technically an example of how you can use this technology pair together. It's a conference site for the largest Finnish-speaking React conference in Finland. It's this October. Welcome, everybody. But technically, this is just a simple website where you can go to react.nu. So you can go and you can click the links. And from within this network, you can see different things. So if I click here, it only does the GraphQL request. And you can also see other pages. But then the point here is that what you have is a server-side rendered application. But I didn't need to know how this is built. And that's why I like it. That's why I think it can be useful for content management, which is very low margin business. So in any case, this is kind of the core thing which I wanted to just to do a hello world on. And it's together with GraphQL, I think it was quite interesting to do. So in this case, for the backend, I used what I use daily at work. So I use the Easy Platform tool, which is a content management system, which is based on a tree structure and obviously a lot of other things as well. But I have a root node here, so just you have a rough idea on how the backend looks like. So very simple content structure, but I also have a GraphQL view into this. So if you see an interface like this, this is graphical. It's a client to GraphQL, which is very good. One of the key things which I didn't mention about GraphQL is that the API sends its documentation over to the client. It's called introspection or some fancy word, but introspection, well, I can't spell it now. But in any case, I can open any GraphQL API and see what kind of queries I can make. I can also do modifications, but queries are here. This query or whatever you can do here is always dependent on your application domain, obviously. So GraphQL doesn't mean that everything will work in the same way. But for example, in the case where we had this example, I can look that we have, this is location ID 68. I know the domain, how this works. So we have a child. So we have location children. And because we get a lot of information from the API, I also get auto-completion. So I can write location children. Let me see if I can get this a little bit bigger. Then I get ID nothing, because it's I didn't send any ID. So what I need to do is send 68 to it. And this is the GraphQL syntax. So what I'm doing is I'm now getting location children. By default, it gives me IDs because IDs are required. I can also get more things. I can get the values or content, yes, because this is a location object. Location doesn't have any fields. I can expand from here, and then I can get the values here, or fields, yes. I can get the fields here. If I want from the field, I want the individual values, I can get them like this, and you can see basically that it works like this. So any kind of request I make to the backend, it will return it in the same exact shape. As said, it's only a syntax, and you need to obviously have all the implementation for your application as well. But the key here is, as opposed to a REST, you will have kind of different responses depending on your query and so on. Good. That was quite fast, hopefully. So one thing that we can then take a look at is just a quick look at the functionality. So one of the key things about Next is that if I have here it running, so if I have just on my local, if I add one single file, it's an entry point which will then boot a single component, which in this case will be about. And all I need to do is to write a very simple stateless component. And the framework will now already handle everything for me, in the sense that this about page where I had it here, then if I click to, I will clear this. If I click here, so a lot of consultants will miss money because they couldn't spend, I don't know, 20 days on server-side rendering because, well, I just created one in 5 minutes. So it's natural progression, and probably there's some opinions which you may not like, but it is very efficient if you want this kind of thing. And then that was obviously very simple and had nothing to do with GraphQL. It was just a very basic hello world. But then if you do want to send parameters to the backend, so in this case we have React Now and activity/73. If you want this backend to receive parameters, which it can't receive when it's just like index.php, you would like index.php and question mark ID equals 73. It's very similar. So you do need a custom server, but the custom server, technically you just pass some parameters, and then you can hook on to those parameters and then perform some actions there. As said, you will have access to the full glorious layout and all of the code for your own experiments and so on. As said, the code base of Next.js is actually very nice in the sense that they give you examples of how you would do things, because some of the things which are very simple are not very simple to do in an environment like this, like Google Analytics. Normally, well, I just want Google Analytics, just paste the tag. But here, no, you need to make sure you download everything, because it's JavaScript, it's fancy. But in any case, back to the point. So in our index.js, because you can nest multiple different queries into a single query within GraphQL, here I get the main content here. So this is technically just this, but I also do get the navigation menu here. So going back here, the Next.js has it's a React class or component class or component object. When you add get initial props, then this is the one that will initialize it and so on. Now I need to really speed up because I'm already 15 minutes, but it's good. So here, pretty standard stuff. I'm using the ES6 template literals, and then I get the ID, then I pass that. This is my GraphQL specific to this page. It has some, because I could also serve something else than HTML, but I can also get the activities. So in this case, a single request will also yield the child objects. So I will only do one request, which is very good. And obviously, whatever you kind of feel like doing is then standard, React work, and so on. Navigation, obviously, then you can reuse your components across different pages and so on. But then to the actual meat of it. So what I kind of view as valuable, because I kind of work every day with this kind of things. So I think this does allow a good thing. The best thing is that it allows you to try new things, because you can get really stuck in like, well, I can just create a website really fast. Well, yeah, you can create it like 55 times, but this will allow you to create it again and again. And it has some structure which is defined. So instead of one person building a website and then nobody ever will know how to update that because, well, that person left. Well, it's just a website, yeah, but it's so hard it can't be updated. Okay, then we go to somebody else. I do like React as a templating engine because it forces structure. It's like XSL. You have to have it valid, so it's good. Also, you could export HTML from the Next.js supports that you export HTML. So then you don't even need to run Node on a server. You just run HTML on a server somewhere, which is really good. I don't know how you would do it with a dynamic thing like this, but technically you can do it. I did find that it's opinionated, but for me it was flexible enough. Maybe if you have some thought or that this is wrong, this is how it shouldn't be done, maybe it's not good for you. It does allow you to have no compromise SEO, because the server renders the HTML for the first time, so the robots will get the full HTML, which is good. And then of course you can use whatever React you could then pick up from there and create sort of the same kind of things and so on. I think for even more than sites, I would say e-commerce is where you actually make money of the site. So for e-commerce, this is probably really, really good, because you can have a horrible Magento thing with an API and still create a great front end with a horrible back end. Not to say that it's something like that, but anyway, yeah, so you can use whatever things you're used to and so on. And of course you can take this up a notch. You can integrate some kind of MobX or other state management tools which you may like. So from my understanding, it's quite standard JavaScript practices that are being applied. The bad, well, there's always a curve for JavaScript, JSX. If you just want to quickly get up to it, of course, you're all, well, it's easy. But then if you ask a man from the street, how do you echo in PHP? Well, you just echo and then it works. But hey, in JSX, well, this. But then, of course, need to know a few things. So there's a more higher learning curve than in doing WordPress templating for sure. Then you lose a lot of CMS capabilities, because CMS is content management, but it has a lot to do with layout management. You create forms for feedback and all that kind of thing. So it's, you have Contentful, but Contentful only gives you forms you need to do, or forms about data. So you need to add a lot more and so on. Another thing which can be complex to do is analytics. So of course you need to pick it up, make sure it loads on each virtual request or whatever you want to call it when you use just the API. But also if you just put in something, some random script, and then it gets to React, but then it's marketing pasted something which is not valid JSX, then it will and then everybody is calling that why the website did break. Now when we had WordPress, it never broke because HTML is very resilient. You just put whatever and the browser will figure it out. It won't black or get a horrible screen on you. It will kind of look like shit, but it's still good. Yeah, then obviously regular HTTP caching strategies won't work because it's post, and then you have like two different things. You have one server-side rendered view. If you cache that, then what if your feed is not cached, and then you can end up probably in a new world of issues, especially if you're thinking about sort of site building. Then still, like server plus browser development can be quirky. I noticed this when I was doing just the basic GraphQL things. The course, obviously the server didn't mind that I didn't have course headers, it just got that, but the browser was like, what? So this is the kind of thing that most of the things, if you look now, there's really good utilities for isomorphic fetch, so you can do, or the GraphQL library which I use, so you use it both on server and client, which is mostly very good, but I can imagine you will have some kind of headaches, which very simple thing will actually be very hard. Yeah, and of course it's from Facebook, and there's patents, so I don't know, GitHub uses it, so maybe they're fucked also if they use it for patents. I don't know. The ugly one, does it really provide any value? I don't know, because the initial page load, the initial volume is higher. If your user will never surf only that one website, well, that doesn't really matter. So it's kind of, well, it's not going to be any kind of fantastic experience because you can have it without this. Another one is obviously the first load, especially if you don't use caching for your backend generated code, you will need to render that each time for each user using React, which is not like, even if it's Node, you still have to do a lot of work instead of just sending out an HTML blob. So it will kind of create your CPU bounds server load, and also then the API calls will block. If your API is really slow, then the initial response will be really slow because you kind of just wait to get the GraphQL or any response in the first time. So it's a kind of can be even worse. And then I can imagine like the caching stuff, which I briefly talked about, can get really hairy and difficult and hard to find bugs if you go really fancy. Regarding login, or then you just don't cache maybe at all for logged users is one option. Then one thing that I can actually think about is the GraphQL you could see that is very open. It tells you exactly what it can do. So it's also a security hazard because it tells you, well, you can find all users here. Then like, okay, let me try if I can find all users. Oh, I can find every user. So if it really just like tells you that what you can do. So probably if you do want to expose a public GraphQL API, I would create a separate endpoint which you specifically select what you want to show, not have like a default one like this. Because also another thing regards to security is that vulnerable to GraphQL injections. Because I can imagine then that if we take a look at this code, maybe here, yes, here. So what I'm writing here is GraphQL inline. So I don't know, probably this ID, I didn't sanitize it at all. So, but anyway, probably it's like you'll just escape and do SQL injection, but in GraphQL. So I can imagine that's one thing that if you just kind of are intoxicated with the power of GraphQL, then this will happen. And then somebody will be angry because things worked fast, but were shit. Good. We're a bit over time, but you can find the slides there. Easiest way and best place to find them is obviously by clicking React Now. And then there's a view source link, so you can find the source. And you can find the whole application, not the API. The API is locked down, so you cannot find it. But if you're interested in how it works, this is where you can get to the details, and obviously then, yeah, the slides are also there, will probably be shared by the team for the event. So thank you for this time. Hope you have some understanding now, and if you have any questions, I can try to answer them, but I pretty much told you everything I know.
I've actually seen the slides before. Is this on? No? What? It's done? Yeah? Alright. So, yeah, I think like thanks for the talk. It's interesting. We've been actually building a publishing website for the past 9 months with this exact stack, except for the Next.js, we have a homebrew Express app doing the SSR at a Finnish publishing company, and we're actually using PHP as a backend for the GraphQL server. So if you're into PHP, you should try the Yuschick library.
Yeah, this is also has a PHP backend currently.
Okay,
yeah.
all
and
right.
I know there's 2 bundles, but I didn't come here to talk about PHP.
Yeah, all right. So, so for us, like the concerns you had hasn't been that much. Like there's been like at least no performance issues. We have like a very, very quick responsive API, and there's no blocking actions or anything like that. But of course, you have to kind of put your mind into it, like how you build it. But I would like to ask a little bit, like quickly, about what's the opinionated part about Next.js. Like, what's the most opinionated part that you found?
Because I have maybe limited amount, I didn't really find the only opinionated thing. It has to be really kind of like React. So one thing, by the way, about Next.js is the NPM.
You can't use React Router probably either.
I think it uses React Router probably
okay.
by default. But anyway, I think the search is actually probably built using Next.js. So obviously longevity is one question, but I think this is one of the example cases where they have actually used Next.js. And if you use it on NPM, maybe somebody else also uses it. Yeah. But for me, as said, nothing came into my way. But then again, I only build websites without forms.
Yeah, we have some forms. They have been working like pretty well.
Yeah, because
with mutations.
I imagine that you could integrate any kind of React thing into the flow.
Yeah. If someone's like interested in this stack, you can come ask me. We're using Apollo for the client, so that has been working really well. I'll be glad to talk about it if you want to hear more. So, yeah, thanks, I guess. Anyone else?
More questions?
Okay. All right.
Good. Okay. We're probably twice the time, but it's bad enough. Thank you.